Gotta come off mute. There we go. Hey, good, Brian. Thanks for having me here. I always love doing this. And thanks for reading off what I said I was going to talk about. I'd forgotten that I said I was going to talk about all those things, but I think I got them covered in these talks. I'm always trying to pull together the latest data from all of our research. So,
Well, as long as you're giving us good news for 2023 and beyond, all is forgiven.
I think it's not too bad. We're going to do pretty well here, and I'll dive into it. First of all, we've got a lot of momentum going on at Intersect 360 Research right now. We had a big SC22. I was thrilled to get to moderate the opening HPC Accelerates plenary with an excellent host of panelists on there. Jim Cherry was an absolute star. And if you haven't seen the video from it or weren't there, I would really recommend this panel. We got to talk about a lot of really exciting global HPC issues. Beyond that, we had the most attendees ever at our Monday afternoon reception. Dan Olds and I did an entertaining SmackDown style panel debate on composability. Um, Dan did a road trip of US national labs to and from supercomputing. Um, and I got to moderate a BOF on racial inclusion in high performance computing, which is something that Dan and I have each been trying to promote in our roles as industry analysts. We not only promoted the SC22 student cluster competition, but brought one of our own teams from our 2022 Winter Classic student cluster competition, which specifically does outreach to minority serving institutions in the US, historically Black colleges and universities and Hispanic serving institutions who get otherwise underrepresented on the conference circuit. All of those things are open for sponsorship through us again through 2023. And I've got another slide on that later in the deck. And then right on the heels of supercomputing, this was our biggest news, which is that we added Steve Conway to the team. Many of you will recognize Steve as a longtime industry analyst. I worked with him at IDC before I went to Intersect 360, and then the IDC team later became Hyperion. He had left Hyperion earlier in 2022, and we are thrilled to welcome him to the Intersect 360 research team. He brings us some considerable depth on uh, AI, on European markets, on sustainability. We're going to really enjoy having Steve and his insights and skills on our team. Steve at intersect360.com. We'll get to him. So you'll be seeing things from Steve throughout the year and on an ongoing basis. Things that we're watching in 2023. Brian, you just read off a bunch of these. So I think this really fits with the agenda that we put together. HPC and AI together or separate. In the near term, certainly together. In the long term, we're seeing what happens there. And I'll get into what I mean as I look at some of the configuration data that we're tracking there. The processor wars that we've continued to monitor over the last decade, it seems, are now reaching the full culmination as we get into Intel with Ponte Vecchio and the Intel Max line. That's a consolidated all Intel environment. AMD with the MI300 is an all AMD environment. NVIDIA with Grace Hopper presents an all NVIDIA environment. And then we have a lot of other initiatives out there. In particular, RISC-V is getting some additional interest, especially in Europe. And then there's a wealth of other types of processors and co-processors, and they all have effects on software environments. When we were in the Beowulf cluster era, the emphasis was on portability. I could get anybody's kit. It didn't matter who. I had to go through the pain of putting my code in MPI once. And then what I got out of that was ultimate portability, and it performed the same no matter where I took it. We're now at the extreme opposite of that, or entering the extreme opposite of that, where you have intense specialization so you can really optimize your applications or codes, workloads for one particular environment, but what you sacrifice is the portability going from one to the next. So that's going to be what we're watching in this generation. That's really continued to fuel national efforts in supercomputing, where the EU can really be considered like a nation in this state, in this case. But we have, for example, US exascale initiatives, European exascale initiatives, Chinese, Japanese, Indian exascale initiatives, and they're all focusing on indigenous technologies with their own independent roadmaps. Steve Conway will be at the Euro HPC Summit this year. I went to it last year. We'll be really monitoring a lot of these trends around the world as they continue to heat up. Europe in particular is poised to do a lot in the next generation coming up while we tee up the next US exascale systems. New paradigms in high performance storage. A lot of this is going to be explored in our next survey. We've surveyed it before, but looking at for example, the rise of storage tiering, the effect of on-node flash elements, which we've monitored before, but is really picking up here. And when people ask us about storage market shares, it's getting trickier than ever, because two of the big up-and-comers in this space now, Weka and Vast, technically neither of them actually sell storage. They're both software and subscription pass-through models. So how we talk about storage market share is going to be changing. We have been doing a lot of research and continue to do a lot of research around liquid cooling, power consumption, sustainability. I've got some stats in this presentation. Talent development and diversity, you'll hear me continue to talk about every chance I get. We think it's so important here I think for the long-term health of our industry, this is the most important bullet point on this list. We need new talent. We need new pools of talent coming into HPC and AI, and we put a lot of our own efforts on that as industry analysts. And then overarching all of that is the role of hyperscale, and that includes the role of cloud and cloud-like sorts of deployments, which we're also tracking with things like facilities outsourcing or on-prem HPC as a service, with services ranging from HPE GreenLake, Dell Apex, Lenovo TrueScale, Atos Nimbix, Fujitsu Computing as a Service, Penguin as a on demand. A lot of major vendors have these on-prem as a service offerings now. Just a snapshot at some of our end user surveys. We do the technology adoption survey annually. That'll be coming up. We've completed the budget survey, which gives us some of the top level data we need to do our market sizing and forecasting, as well as look at spending trends for things like CapEx versus OpEx, or how is supply chain affecting things. The CapEx versus OpEx, I didn't put a slide in here, but we're tracked it for the second straight year. Because we hear so often about this advantage of as a service or going to cloud is, hey, we're going to help you move CapEx to OpEx. And we're like, how many people care, right? And what we found was that about 3/4 of the market either doesn't care, or they care, but they already have it the way they like it. And then out of the remaining 25%, it goes about 2-to-1 now in favor of people who want more OpEx, less CapEx, as opposed to the other way around. Some of them want more CapEx, less OpEx. And I think the emphasis on OpEx is pandemic related, and we'll see that balance out a little more as we get toward a more what you call quote unquote normal economic activity. I do have some highlights from our deep dive survey on AI and machine learning. We put that in here, all kinds of topics in that, more than I'm going to be able to present here, mostly because we're still presenting it to clients. And then coming up, tech adoption again, and deep dives on storage and data management. This is a slide I've shown before, but want to emphasize here in terms of the increasing competition on the CPU side. This is looking at the last time we ran this was late 2020. So the next time we run it will be in our next survey. It'll be at about an 18-month gap, not quite 18 months, between 12 and 18 months between when we ran the survey last time and when we run it the next time. We're interested in seeing how much this has changed. Usually when we ask people about futures, the amplitude, or rather the direction of change is correct, but the amplitude winds up being exaggerated from what actually happens, which is a way of saying change takes longer than people think it will. In a survey, if someone says, oh yeah, I'm going to spend, I'm going to, we're going to go 100% to liquid cooling in the next 2 years, or 60% of people are going to go to liquid cooling in the next 2 years, what you find is that the direction is correct, but the actuality of how long it takes tends to damp down. So we want to compare what the new current is versus the future on this chart. We really haven't seen power do anything on here, but RISC-V and ARM might both start to pick up. ARM particularly with Grace from NVIDIA, and RISC-V with some of the European initiatives. I really want to see if that RISC-V number starts to move. 81% of users in our surveys have accelerators somewhere in their HPC and AI environments. Of those, 36% of the nodes are accelerated, which means 29% of all HPC AI nodes are accelerated. And then the future was projected to go plus 6% on top of that. This again is the survey we were about to rerun. So we're going to see how much this has moved in the last roughly 15 months, and then what the new future outlook is. This is what I really like to look at here. First of all, the big chart on the right, this has been an NVIDIA dominated market, but we've been anticipating that AMD and now Ponte Vecchio coming up will have the opportunity to move in there. We want to see how much penetration AMD has made already and how much potential there is for AMD and Intel going forward. It should still be a pretty thoroughly NVIDIA dominant GPU market. The more interesting thing to me is the histogram in the top left, accelerators per node in broad usage. At the end of the year 2020, the tallest bar in the histogram had gone to 4 GPUs per, well, 4 accelerators per node. Technically, that's not restricted to the GPUs, but it's, you know, it's mostly GPUs in here. So if I say 4 GPUs, excuse me, it's 4 GPUs per node had become the most prevalent by plurality. That's a change. We used to see it all as 1 and 2, and this is the effect of machine learning coming into the market, where we're seeing more GPU dense configurations. You're even seeing there, a reasonable percentage with 8 or more than 8 GPUs per node. You can get some pretty dense DGX configurations and other custom configurations that really pack in accelerators per node. Those are really machine learning focused and presents a bit of a push-pull with HPC, where we get into a mixed HPC AI environment. 15% of users were saying their accelerators are not highly utilized, or 30% are saying they're not as highly utilized as expected. A third saying that these are compute islands not easily accessed by other systems. Backing up one chart here, this is because the real sweet spot for a lot of traditional HPC applications, scientific workloads for GPUs, is going to be in 0, 1, or 2 GPUs per node. Machine learning, you get a lot that really want 8 or more per node. And what we see with this 4 is it can be kind of the medium that punishes both sides equally, that just kind of everyone hates the same. And this is where we want to see, all right, what happens with this? Do you keep layering in more GPUs, but sometimes they're underutilized? Does something like composability come to the rescue and let you share GPUs across nodes? We've seen a lot of interest in Giga.io, in liquid computing, CXL and the like. CXL is a little more on the memory sharing, but still the sharing of GPUs in memory for machine learning is going to be interesting to watch there. And then, or do you get to where you say, these are my machine learning nodes and these are my HPC nodes, and they start to diverge again? So that's something we'll be watching. I see a hand up from Axel. I'll take one quick question now, but then I've got a lot of content, so I'll keep going after that.
Yeah, no, I think the numbers are fantastic. They confirm what we've heard, but the issue today that we are seeing is that you can't get to an accelerator fast enough because they're islands, and that's exactly the problem. Right? But if you make it homogeneous so that any processor, any core gets to any accelerator and any memory, then that problem to a large degree goes away. And that's what we're focusing on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And what we're seeing is where people are reporting dissatisfaction with system efficiency or utilization. One of the top, I don't think I put this chart in here, we have it, but one of the top reasons now that comes up is hardware application mismatch. I've got this hardware and it's not right for this application. Some of that is, again, pushing the use of cloud where I need a specialized node type that I don't have on-prem. We're monitoring perceptions of the different combinations of CPUs and accelerators. Chin, I see you there. I'm going to keep presenting for a second, then I'll come back to you. People like GPUs, people like x86 CPUs together with NVIDIA GPUs in the last survey. The problem is exactly what I was just saying. This isn't where the market's going right now. So to go all Intel or all AMD or all NVIDIA, according to this chart, asking people what they want means making a sacrifice in some dimension, sacrificing on the CPU or sacrificing on the GPU. That's why we're so interested in watching how this continues to evolve. I've got more stats coming up on AI, but I'll take a quick question from Chin. Go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't heard you talking about federated learning, which is a trend that we have encountered and observed more and more in the large data producing vertical, the healthcare and life sciences, which occupies about 30% of the data across all the verticals. That's significant, 1/3. So can you share some perspective after you have done your regular presentation?
Perspective on how much data there is per
No,
vertical?
federated learning spreading into other verticals. Right now, I see more and more HLS organizations moving towards that. Okay.
Yeah, let's come back to that at the end. That would be a bit
Oh,
of
sure.
a divergence. So I'll come back to that at the end of the talk. AI influence in high performance computing. These are some data from our most recent surveys. From the budget survey, now this is among people who tend to be HPC users, but 71% of those say HPC and AI are coming from a common budget. We are separately tracking, and I'll get to this in a future slide, the emergence of what you can call a pure AI budget for an organization that doesn't do any HPC at all. Most of those are really cloud heavy, but we do measure some on-prem with that as well. But they tend to now be common budgets, common configurations, common people. They're not as distinct as you might think. They're overlapping. One of the most common things that we see is that machine learning is used for the pre or post processing. That should say pre or post processing, not procession. Sorry, typos. I was trying to get my slides together. Pre or post processing for HPC applications. That's one of the top. The other one that comes up the highest is image processing. Because that applies across so many different verticals. You can find it in manufacturing, in oil and gas. You can find it in medicine. So image analysis or image processing is another very common use of AI. And we had 15, 20 different use cases that we can attach percentages to now. Select more than one, right? It doesn't have to be only one thing, but machine learning for pre or post processing is one of the most common. Only 18% say they have machine learning in full production, but there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of proof of concept. And when you look at it that way, 18% is full production is actually kind of high for where we are in the machine learning trend. More stats on it. 29% say that they're doing continuous or near continuous training or retraining of models. We asked, how often do your models get retrained? Is it like this? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it annual? Is it there's no retraining? And I was surprised at how high that number was, to look at nearly a third being continuous retraining or frequent retraining of the models. About a quarter of respondents say their data growth is in excess of 50% a year. We've got this in all different tiers. Sometimes it's more than doubling. So certainly the data growth is still there. 80% of the, or sorry, 37% of the overall machine learning workload at these HPC sites is run in public cloud. That's a higher gravity to cloud than we get in the non-machine machine learning workloads. The other thing is, when I look at the more atomic data of the different frameworks and what's in cloud and what's on-prem and where the data is, one of the reasons this number is kind of on the, what I would interpret to be the high side, is that public cloud is getting used for the very scalable runs. And then when you have the smaller runs on single node, two node, a couple of nodes, those will be in-house. Then when I want to scale it, they go out to cloud. And then of course that dominates you from a total workload perspective because it's a bigger run. But we do see public cloud having more of an affinity toward those larger runs. The value of machine learning, people are reporting very strongly. This is just an array of agree, disagree statements, but you get over 85% of people agreeing with the idea that machine learning gives them better research insights. Everything is in positive agreement here down the line, with the exception of people are kind of neutral on machine learning has helped us lower our costs. I mean, there's a few more positives than negatives, but if you're out there trying to market what machine learning will do for you, people aren't grooving with the lower costs as much as they are increased model accuracy or improve product quality, more business opportunities, new product lines, increased profitability. Those are the things that people are seeing for machine learning. About 50% of HPC or AI users, this is going to power and cooling constraints. This is a separate topic now, but one that we're definitely monitoring, and we have a couple of questions on in our most recent surveys. 50% of users in our surveys are agreeing with these statements. And the reason it says approximately is each one is a different percent, ranging from 49 to 52, but call it about half, okay? The top left is my favorite. We've made compromises in system configurations based on power consumption. That's saying someone is getting not what they really want to get because of power consumption, because people are also agreeing that their data centers are constrained by power availability or constrained by cooling capacity. And people are also agreeing that this is a more limiting factor to their strategy than it was 2 years ago. So this is coming up. We're tracking the increase in liquid cooling. We're tracking the different ways that liquid cooling gets incorporated, from door chillers to fully plumbed racks, direct liquid cooling. We're looking at all of these different, immersion cooling. We look at all of these in our surveys, but this is something you should expect to continue to hear more about over the course of this year and next year. I'm just going to mention this research rather than really go through it again. Now, this is based on 2021 still. I'm giving some background before I talk about our 2022 market sizing. But when we did it in 2021, we presented this full data center model for the first time of all enterprise computing spending. Now, we're not general enterprise analysts, we're HPC and AI and hyperscale analysts. But the reason we did it for the first time is because it looks like this now, where hyperscale is so increasingly dominating the landscape that if we don't put it on one chart and divide it up and start showing this is how big hyperscale is now, okay, that we're still having trouble convincing people or demonstrating graphically how much of an influence there is from these hyperscale companies. Now, hyperscale in this context is more than cloud. I don't like using hyperscale and cloud service provider as synonyms, because cloud service providing is one business line that a hyperscale company can have, which is a way of saying pedantically, Amazon is much bigger than AWS. Microsoft is much bigger than Azure. Google is much, much bigger than GCP. And then you get companies like Apple and Meta or Facebook that are certainly hyperscale companies, but not enterprise cloud providers in that sense. Apple's a cloud provider, but they're a consumer cloud provider, not an enterprise cloud provider. So do you think of them as a CSP or not, right? So we like to refer to this as hyperscale. The top 10 companies here are accounting for close to certainly over 80, close to 90% of that 115 billion. We're going to do this model again this year for 2022 so we can show the year over year change. Then there's additionally the spending that goes in the cloud, AI training, and the pure AI budgets is more cloud oriented than the HPC. I'm not really going to go through all this other than to point out that we're still doing it. The AI training by Hyperscale themselves is huge. If you go look, all of these Hyperscale companies are buying hardware to do machine learning. The reason you're having trouble buying a Hopper right now is probably because they're all going to Meta, right? There's a huge supercomputer going in there that's fueled by NVIDIA hardware through Penguin, and they're consuming a lot of GPUs. That's part of this AI training by Hyperscale companies. A couple of perspectives on Hyperscale I can't resist throwing in just because I love saying it to drive home the perspective. If a large-scale national supercomputer costs hundreds of millions of dollars, which it generally does, you talk about a Frontier, Fugaku, something like that, there are 10 hyperscale companies spending over $1 billion a year reliably. That's an order of magnitude more than your $100 million. Then there are 4 that spent over $10 billion in 2021. 2 spent over $20 billion in 2021. That's 100 times a $200 million supercomputer. Hyperscale companies alone spent over $12 billion on AI infrastructure in 2021. It says last year on there. Last year in this context is 2021, not 2022. The top 2 hyperscale companies' data centers worldwide cover more than 25 square miles, meaning you couldn't fit them on Manhattan Island together. If you think about that in the context of a Frontier, Fugaku, your footprint for that might take up a city block, right, compared to all of Manhattan. That's the order of magnitude that we're talking about with hyperscale computing. And it has a huge influence on HPC and other industries. This is where the rise of machine learning came from. It's where most of the research was getting started. Languages like Python and Go and Julia are finding their way increasingly into HPC. It's affecting product design. It's affecting product availability. It's definitely affecting talent acquisition with how many people they're hiring. And it has effect on international trade and domestic technology development. When you look at tensions, for example, between US and China, and what does TikTok mean for the US economy, right? This has an effect downstream on HPC and certainly on AI. So we look at all of these things when we forecast the global HPC AI market. That means when we're doing our market sizing now, we're looking at both a traditional HPC view, budgets as we would normally have counted them, which, sub-bullet on there, often usually includes machine learning and can even be an increased budget because of machine learning. That's separate from what you could call a pure AI budget, which is entirely independent. HPC doesn't exist here at all. And now AI is coming in out of whole cloth, and we're doing AI and we've never heard of HPC. That's what we talk about with the pure AI that we're adding in this expanded HPC plus AI view, which then, what's going on here? I'm losing it. This then looks like this. You get this little bit of additional pure machine learning only, not associated with HPC, that's really cloud heavy, but there is a little bit of on-prem there. There's enough that it moves the numbers, and we have to show that in the server line. Whether or not you can, which one you count is a matter of taste. Some of our clients like them together, some of our clients like them separate. So we're doing it both ways now. And then this is the forecast of HPC and AI training. The forecast as we did it in 2021 going into 2022. You can see we're forecasting about 10% growth there, 2021 to 2022, as we, come out of the pandemic economy. The reality was 2022, as we start looking at the market sizing for HPC and AI, this is in process now. This is the worst time of year for me to give a talk because everyone wants me to give the 2022 numbers and they're not done yet. First of all, we need the latest quarterly data from HPE and Dell, which are offset by a month on when their quarters are. So they haven't released the final quarters yet that include November and December. And you say, okay, 2 months, what's the big deal? Well, Frontier is the big deal. We're waiting for it to hit HPE's books and make the call on whether that's a 2022 revenue or 2023 revenue. So we've got to wait on that as a key input. We have collected the budget change data year over year. I will say relative to the forecast that we put out, that up 10% is soft. It's not so soft that we pre-announced and said, hey, we're way under the forecast. But as a betting man, if I had to bet our forecast as an over-under line right now, I'd bet the under. I think we're not going to hit that full amount of growth. 25% of users still said that there were supply chain issues that affected their 2022 spending. And half of those said that the spending got deferred into 2023. So there's some money that's falling out of the market and into the next year. We're also, this is weird, this is the first time I've seen this in 15 years, seeing a higher than usual proportions of users with either very high or very major decline, very high growth or major decline to their budget year over year. The tails in that burnt orange color on the chart that's there, either saying they have a budget growth of over 20% or a budget decline of more than 20%. And figure in, all right, if a company just stops existing or spending entirely, they probably don't answer our survey. Now, we do modeling on all of this, and if we look at, say, just the commercial respondents, which make up a lot more of the market, well, it's not quite as bad. It's a little better than this. But this is weird that we saw this bifurcation, and I think that's, again, still tied to some of the pandemic economy of companies that were either doing very well or very poorly. So this was an unusual dynamic. Usually we see kind of a curve with a peak in the middle, and having these larger than usual bars out on each side was interesting. All right, I'm going to get close to wrapping up and taking questions. I mentioned talent and diversity in this space. Our 2023 Winter Classic Invitational Student Cluster Competition is getting underway. We have 12 teams, again, from historically Black and Hispanic serving colleges, universities in the U.S. We have sponsors, we have mentors. One of the things this lets us do is divide those things. If your organization wants to be a mentor and help the students learn how to start putting together the clusters, scale things up, run the applications, that's one role. If what you'd like to do is say, I don't want to get involved in all that work, but I'd like to give you some money, that's a different thing that you can do. They don't have to be the same. You can do both, but and if you'd still like to sponsor this one, we have not yet closed out the sponsorships or started producing all of these fun videos with Dan and me and our sports caster yellow blazers. That's so much fun. So we can put your logos on all this. Would love to include you as a 5K sponsor for the student cluster competition, and really to just support diversity and talent development in HPC. This was so rewarding talking to the students last year and the different things that would resonate. It doesn't take with all of them, but I would talk to one who really loved computational fluid dynamics and another who really got into machine learning. And then here was a woman who didn't take to the HPC as much, but got fascinated by cybersecurity. I'm like, that's great. If you want to do cybersecurity, we can find you a lead on that through HPC. Really, there's people who care about that. And it's been so much fun to do that. So do check that out. And those are my slides. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Addison. Appreciate it. Sorry we couldn't get those 2022 numbers. So if I hear you right, you would like the Stanford conference to begin what dates?
You know, usually we get the first draft of the previous year, late March, early April out to clients. We'll publish it in April in a good year. So now let's see, when's Lugano coming up?
April 3rd through 6th.
Yeah, ask again for Lugano. I'll try to have them for that. We're trying to do them early this year.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Steve and I will discuss this further for 2024. I do have one question.
And by the way, when I make those slides available through the advisory council, if you've got people in the distribution who are here at this and then want the updated slides from Lugano, I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Addison. Appreciate it. All these slides are posted, and same with Lugano. When that conference takes place, those will be publicly available, and we'll let folks know on our social media channels and newsletters. The first question I have here is: presume the accelerators per node stat is of accelerated installed base of 81%.
That's correct. Any that don't have any accelerators installed would have been 0 on there would have been a separate bar there on 0. So the histogram was of those who do have accelerators.
Gotcha.
And I see Chin there waving at me.
Yeah. So do you mind? The term accelerator actually, depending on people and the company, could mean different things. If what you in your talk, it seems to me you mean the accelerator GPU equipped devices, either add-on cards or building GPUs. Am I correct?
It doesn't have to be a GPU, but generally we're looking at different types of co-processors, GPUs, FPGAs, could be other types of co-processors that don't run the operating system, which would distinguish them from a CPU, which is you have to have a CPU running the operating system, and then you can add some other type of co-processor. ClearSpeed, for example, would have been an old example of another type of co-processor that was not a GPU. We would count something like that. You also asked, I saw in your comment about DPUs. That's a bit of a tweener that's going to give me a toothache about how we'd count those. Is that part of the networking? Is it part of the processing? And as they become more common, I need to talk to Dan and Steve about how we're going to account for them.
Yeah, may I make a follow-up comment to just
Yes.
what you said? DPU actually is considered as accelerators by both Intel and NVIDIA. Intel actually also use FPGA for certain functions. And as to accelerators, and now Intel even has integrated the quick assist technology chips into the Sapphire Rapids, which NVIDIA is using for its latest GPU servers. Okay, so the accelerators actually are part of the CPU now, even though they don't run on the regular cores.
Well, so, yeah, it's a good point. And we've talked about I even had conversations with Chris Willard about this, our co-founder, our original chief research officer, who noted that when things are really common, they tend to migrate on chip eventually. Floating point units used to be co-processors.
Right.
And then eventually it migrates in, and we're already seeing trends toward this of machine learning capability moving on chip and the chiplet model really helps with this, to where you can see some of the functionality from a co-processor start to get incorporated on chip in the long run. I agree with you. Right now, we don't have that problem as we count the market. And if forced, we would probably call the DPU an accelerator, but we might set up a separate category and call it an off-node accelerator or something like that.
Okay.
But then or there's the problem: is it off the node or not? You could have a DPU that's on the switch. You can have a DPU that's on the node but on the I/O channel. I mean, where is it? So
it can be because it's a standalone unit. It can be just in an enclosure. Seriously, with a PCIe bus. That's it. It has been done.
Right. Rockport claims to have a switchless network by putting the switch as part of the I/O channel on the node, right? So,
yeah,
eventually there's switching that goes on somewhere. You just might do it without a switch, right?
Yeah. May I ask you to
unless Brian cuts you off, you can ask me as much as you want. I got nothing else going on. This is my favorite thing I'm doing today.
Hey, Brian, do I have the permission to ask one more?
Thanks for asking me. I do have a question later on, but let's go ahead and keep going.
You see, I pasted a link from Intel, okay, to you.
I see it.
Yeah. So you can see that federated learning for AI, especially in the healthcare and the life sciences, is getting really a lot of attention. It's on radar on many organizations now, as far as I know. So in your research, do you and Dan have seen something like this you can comment on in other verticals?
Well, with the caveat that I have not read this whole link that you posted yet, I will say yes, where I have seen mention to, I haven't heard it called federated learning till this moment, but distributed AI or edge learning, yes, which is essentially similar to this notion of federated learning. And I've seen it primarily in edge dominated vertical markets. So you could see it in retail or security, things like that. This is one where I'm going to be out on a limb without Dan or Steve here, because you're asking an opinion about something that's developing early. And if you ask 3 analysts, you might get 6 opinions.
Okay.
And I don't, you know, and I'm not always right. If I disagree with Dan and Steve, you want to listen to them too. When it gets to something like federated learning like this, I don't know. I think there's a lot of magical thinking that goes on there. And you know, what created machine learning to begin with was these massive piles of data that are all together. And the idea that I'm now going to create an ambulatory AI that's going to go run around and visit the data and learn from it, I get that it's theoretically possible. I don't think it's practical in the near term at all.
Okay, may I make a quick supplement then?
Sure.
It's because bureaucrats, they establish regulations such as HIPAA in the United States, such as GPDR in Europe, okay? So, and there are many circumstances, especially in the healthcare and life sciences. You can't just move data out of your institution. So
That's right.
you have to do your learning. And just because it's an edge learning, edge, what we define is where you generate data, but it's far away or some distance away from where
I've heard that argument as well, and that one
Yeah.
I will more strenuously reject. If your argument is that this is a way to do AI in the data while getting around the restriction that you're not allowed to move the data, now you're obeying the letter of the law while completely disregarding the spirit of the law. And I think that that if you got it to work, it should be illegal.
Well, you know, Addison, we as a business people, we don't argue with bureaucrats, right?
Hey, look, I'm not saying you can't go try to do it, and I'm not, sure, but you know, you're into a dodgy area there, really, if you ask me.
Well, that time
AI
tell.
is tough. When you get into data privacy, you're asking the question fundamentally at the bottom. What you're asking is, how do I understand all of the data together without understanding any of it specifically, right? And it's a very difficult thing to do, to say you want to understand it in aggregate thoroughly without understanding any individual data point.
So that's why I shared the link with you. I'm sure with
Right.
you and Dan's experience, you can tell whether it makes
and what
sense
has
or not.
fueled it from the hyperscale perspective, this is where I start getting controversial, is that essentially you've personally already signed away your rights to a lot of that data. When you send me an email through Google or Apple or whatever, there's no getting around the notion that if you use a Gmail address, Google is reading every word of that email for meaning and context to do AI on it. Right? They read every word of it, and you agreed to that in order to get a free email address. Same with Facebook, tracking, you know, all of your I mean, it's not, I don't mean to pick on Google. It's any of them. This is the business model, right? You are the product with your data, and you've signed that away. And we Americans like to think that we still have some notion of privacy.
No.
Do you remember which tech executive in which year said, you have no privacy anymore, get over it? People will mistakenly attribute that to Zuckerberg these days, and it wasn't. It was Scott McNealy of Sun Microsystems. The
Yeah.
network is the computer in 1999 said you
Yeah.
don't have privacy anymore. And that was 25 years ago almost, right?
So maybe we will communicate offline. I have some comments about the misconception about edge devices, okay? Because we have dealt with some really huge, large-scale edge devices over the years.
I would be thrilled to hear it. You know, I'm open to it, and if you think I'm wrong, come tell me why.
No, you are not wrong.
We've shown over the years we will change our opinions when
you are not wrong. Just
change.
because it's a matter of perspective. That's all. Definitions. I will just mention.
Thank you for the link. I will read it.
Yeah, I will mention one. The test vehicles from autonomous research. Okay, the fleet. Are they edge devices? They are. They are mobile.
Yes.
They are not small.
Correct.
Okay, so that's it. And I will mention one more. Square kilometer arrays. They each one can produce 1 petabyte per file data. They are edge devices too.
Yes.
So
I agree with both of the things you said.
Yeah, edge devices are not just retail shops, small point of sales devices.
No, but that's where I've heard federated learning come up. It's this idea that your model can then visit all of the data without having to consolidate it.
The results are consolidated, not the data, not the raw data. That can be done. Yes, I do see it in Excel can confirm this. In computing, there's a merge sort, which basically does the same thing.
All right, I'm gonna stop now and let you guys have a conversation offline.
Okay.
Maybe Dan's got something for you too.
Okay.
Addison at intersect360.com.
Great to get you two in touch. Thank you. Thank you for the commentary, Chen. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Addison, you know, I know it's not in the abstract. I know it wasn't in your presentation. Trust me, I did a Control F and word search, and you know, I didn't see anything in terms of quantum computing.
Yeah.
What's going on there? And we're starting to see some big time rifts in some of those companies. Do you have any insight there?
You know, I even talked about this in my December talks at the Society of HPC Professionals and at the CHPC National Conference in South Africa right after supercomputing. One of my takeaways from supercomputing was that no one talked to me about quantum at all. I didn't have a single quantum conversation. Now, I didn't talk to IBM. They probably would have talked to me about quantum. That's about all they talk about that's HPC related these days. Atos, I know, has a quantum product that's their quantum simulator, but I've been briefed on that previously. So it's not like I haven't talked to anybody about quantum, but it went a little quieter recently compared to, say, a year ago.
Right. You know, I think that the last time we were, at least on the HPC Advisory Council side, focusing a lot on quantum computing was just the Australia conference back in the September timeframe. And since then, there really hasn't been any further discussion. So I was just wondering, from your point of view, just what you were seeing, and it just seems like the industry is taking a pause.
There's an old market research platitude that if you really want to find the next big thing, look for what was supposed to be the next big thing 20 years ago and wasn't ready yet. And that's where AI is now, right? It was supposed to be, and then it didn't take off, and now it kind of is. And you might see another generation of quantum. I'm not saying it has to be 20 years, but it could take a rest while the rest of the ecosystem builds up around it. I think what you've got right now is a cool parlor trick that you can do in the lab. Now, what are we going to do with it, right? It isn't to say that it isn't a great achievement, but you know, I use as a parallel, the awesome story of ignition that we talked about yesterday with the fusion energy. All right, you've done that. What's the lag time between that and it's a power source for everyday use? You know, you've got a few more steps in there to build the whole ecosystem around it. And some of that is hardware improvement of getting to the next generation of hardware that's easier to deploy. It's not a bad parallel. It's not that I don't think it's real. I think it's real. I think it just takes time.
It takes time, especially something like this. Okay. Well, thank you, Addison. I appreciate that, that last question for me. Don't have anything else. If you want to hang on, if something else comes up, be very happy to have you answer in the chat.
I will see you in Switzerland.
Yes. Thank you, Addison. Appreciate it. Addison Snell, everyone.